Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jessie Wheeler. I'm the genealogy specialist here at the Boston Public Library. This program is being recorded, and it will be posted on the BPL's YouTube channel when it's ready, and I will be sending a link to everyone who has registered once that is ready, which will hopefully be within a week. So the chat box is open. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and pop them in there. There will be plenty of time for questions. And so today we are pleased to once again be joined by Clotilde Yap. She is the head of global collections at My China Roots, where she researches archives of Chinese communities across the globe. And then we've had her a few times now, and we're always happy to have her. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessie. It's always great to be here. And thank you to the 20 or so people who are with us today. I'm Clotilde. It's my pleasure to present to you how to research your Chinese ancestry with My China Roots, a resource that is available from the Boston Public Library. I would love to know if the folks that are joining us today, if you are based in Boston or you hail from further afield, it would be great to know. Please do feel free to type in the chat, where you're dialing in from and just a bit about what you're hoping to learn today. It's always helpful for me. And then perhaps I can answer some of your queries through my presentation. So I'll just get stuck in. Okay, here we go. So today I'll be giving you a bit of an introduction about My China Roots. What is it? Who are we? What is it that we do? Then I'll present roughly who can use the database, who is it designed for. Then we'll basically talk you through how do you access the database and how do you search for records on the database. What are the different steps to researching your Chinese ancestry, and how can My China Roots help you with these steps? So first of all, what is My China Roots? We are an organization that has been around for over 12 years, and today there are three main things that we do. So our main service really is the database of historical records, which is what we'll be talking about today. But we also offer a family tree builder and family tree software service, which is designed for Chinese families. And on the other side to this, we also have an arm of professional China-based researchers who are available to assist individuals with their more specific research queries. So, for example, we organize roots trips, or if people have documents in Chinese that they want to translate, or they need on-the-ground help and assistance, this is something that we do. And so it's through our many years of experience doing this work that we have been developing the tools and the databases on the My China Roots platform. In terms of what is in the database, you'll see in my demo a little bit later that there is a wide variety of records that you can find. And it is not only records from China and in Chinese. In fact, the majority of our records are going to be, well, the majority of our English language records anyway, are immigrant records. So records of Chinese people who settled outside of China. So these include immigration documents, but also burial files, censuses, directories. And of course, we also do have a large collection of Chinese materials, and these are mostly Chinese family tree books, which are typically found in China. And I'll be telling you more about those as well. So who can use the database? It is really best geared towards people who are second, third, or even fourth generation. And in particular, people whose ancestors arrived in the US between the 1850s and the 1950s and 60s. We do have some collections from other parts of the world. I know that frequently we have people from Singapore and Malaysia and even the Caribbean or Australia that join some of our workshops, which is really fantastic. And while we do have some collections from these countries like Southeast Asia and Jamaica. This is not the bulk of our collections. We are working slowly on increasing our international coverage. And the database is actually designed for people who don't read Chinese. We try to make it accessible because a lot of people who have Chinese ancestors today don't necessarily know how to read and write in Chinese. And most of our Chinese materials are going to be from the provinces of Guangdong and Fujian. So if you know roughly where your family is from, those are the regions that we are most focused on, but we will have some materials from other provinces too. So how do you access the database? If you go to the Boston Public Library website, so sorry, there are two possible ways of accessing it. One is on site. So if you are in Boston and you visit any of the Boston Public Library branches, you can go to one of the computer terminals or even on your own mobile phone or laptop. If you go to mychinarooteslibrary.com, you will automatically get full access. Alternatively, if you have a Boston Public Library card, and an account number, then you can log in remotely. So you navigate to the Boston Public Library website, and under online resources, there is a section called Biography and Genealogy, and we should be listed there, either at the top or under the letter M. If you click on the link, then it will ask you for your account number, password, and once you input those, you'll be able to search even from home. Now, if you are not in Boston and you don't have a Boston Public Library card, we are available in a few other locations. And I'm working on trying to bring my China Roots to many other parts, many other libraries. So if you don't see your own library here, then don't hesitate to contact me. You can drop me a message in the chat and tell me where you're based, and I can try and approach your local library to make it available there. Okay, so what I always like to do is to just ask participants, attendees, why it is that you joined today. And if you're happy to share in the chat, maybe just write a few words about how you've been researching your Chinese ancestry, whether you've gotten stuck at any point, what is the next step for you? What are the things that you are most interested in finding out? I'll give it just maybe 1 minute, and then I'll walk you through the website. Okay, so far we have an existing MCR member joining us. Thank you for supporting us. We have folks from San Francisco. Noreen writes that they came up upon a brick wall in their research using Ancestry, which I also hear a lot. I mean, there are a few databases out there which do have a lot of materials, but they often can only take you so far. And I think it's often due to the language barrier and just the lack of records relevant to the Chinese community on these other platforms. Kunsai says you have photo and oral history about where they came from, which is great. That is a great starting point. Start with photographs and materials, but the original Chinese name is no longer known. Yes, this often happens, and it is true that the key to unlocking your Chinese ancestry is going to be in finding names and information that is in the Chinese language, especially if you're interested in tracing your roots back to China and beyond. We have Wayne in Maine helping Taiwanese friends research their ancestry. So we have a group of people who seem to be joining us from different regions and with um, different research projects. Welcome, Lily, who was adopted and from China. So I think this talk is going to be mostly relevant to people who know roughly about their ancestors and when they arrived or where they would have settled. Unfortunately, the platform is not really designed or built for adoptees. However, we do have some resources available. So let me just show you what that all looks like. Oops. Let me just change my screen. So we have quite a range of folks who are at different stages in their research. So I'm going to show you and talk you through really the steps in getting started. I would say the first stage for most of you who may have already actually gone through this stage, but for those who are just starting out, is really figuring out what it is that you have, what it is that you know, and what it is that you don't know. And that means, namely, um, making lists of names, making lists of relatives, and the dates and the places that are associated with them. So the best way to do this is, I mean, you can do it on a piece of paper, you can do it in a Word document, but you can also do it in a family tree. And there are lots of different family tree tools out there that you can use. I'm just showing you the My China Roots one, which is what I use for my own family. And here you just have some examples. I like to keep things organized with photos, but also with names, both in English and in Chinese, um, as well as dates of birth and dates of death. And in a family tree, it's also easy to keep track of who is related to who. But using a tool like this is helpful because um, you have a form with different fields and you're trying to fill in as many of those as possible. And if there are gaps in it, then you know that's something that is something that maybe you should focus on or try to ask relatives about. Now, this family tree tool is not available through the Boston Public Library subscription, but it is available on mychinaroots.com. So that's just for your reference. Now, if you are indeed just beginning your search and you're not sure about the history and you don't really know how to get started, then if you open the My China Roots database page from either the Boston Public Library website or elsewhere, basically you click mychinarootslibrary.com, you type that in your browser, and you will land on this page, which is just a general search page where you can type in names of ancestors. You also get an overview of the different record categories that we have. But before I dive in here, I want to show you some of our general resources, especially if you are indeed just starting out. So the first thing is probably going to be helpful is this genealogy wiki, which has a series of articles that introduce Chinese family history research. So how do I research my Chinese ancestry? What are the things that I need to keep in mind? And what is possible within this framework? So here you'll learn about the importance of ancestral villages and surnames and clans, what types of records to expect. This adoptee research guide, and this is for Lily, is still in progress. We are developing it with a few other adoptees that we have been working with. So do check back in. We have other articles on general Chinese culture, such as dialects, given names. Actually, maybe I'll zoom in just a tiny bit so you can see better. What are the different Chinese names that exist? Why are there so many different Chinese names for one individual? These kinds of things to sort of warm you up as you are starting your research. And this is just for Lily. I want to make sure you you know about this, but we do have a My China Roots Discord community, which is available at mychinaroots.com/community. And it's free, and we have a lot of actually other adoptees from China who are there and who share resources and their experiences in looking for their roots. And it's a very active, really lovely group of people who are always happy to share and support each other. So that's for you in case you want to go look at that. I'm afraid the rest of my talk might be less relevant to you. Now, if you want to know, what I find is actually always helpful also if I'm researching a certain ancestor or a certain person or family, and I know that they settled somewhere in particular, then I might also check this page of overseas Chinese communities, because I want to understand the general context of when, say, my family or my ancestors may have moved from China to Canada, for example. At what time period did they migrate? What was happening in the world at that time? What was happening in China? And was it typical? Were there a lot of other Chinese people who also left China at that time to go to the specific place? And that is where you can also learn about key patterns or even key origins. To give you an example, you have certain places in the Philippines or in Jamaica where a lot, depending on where in the country you look at, um, where most of the Chinese immigrants came from very similar pockets and areas in China. And so even if you go into this research process without knowing anything about it, if you read up on the general context and history, you might be able to find some clues that you didn't even know were obvious about your family. So this is what I recommend for those who are just kicking off their search, trying to understand what's possible. The next stage is figuring out the key starting points for you, which are your clan or your surname. In Chinese traditional culture, everything revolves around the patriarchal clan, the surname. So, for example, in my family, my father's surname is Yap. My father is Chinese Malaysian. He is the third generation of his family to be born in Malaysia. It was his, sorry, he's the second generation. It was his grandfather, my great grandfather, who left China to go to Malaysia. And because this is the paternal line, everyone always focuses on the Yap heritage, the Yap clan. And this is a very typical, it's just a very typical thing that you can observe amongst Chinese families. So understanding your surname, what it means, and what it represents is also quite important. Surnames in Chinese culture are quite rich in information. Surnames are very ancient. Most surnames date back to 2000 BC. So if you know your Chinese surname, that is already a big step in placing your own family within the context of Chinese history. So if you don't know your Chinese, if you don't read Chinese and you are not sure about your surname, I recommend you use our surname tool, which is also available under resources. It's the first tab right here. And if you type into this form, let's say, everyone keeps talking about Michelle Yeoh these days, the actress Michelle Yeoh. Now, I want to know about Michelle Yeoh's surname. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it represents. If I click on it, I will be able to read more about the Yeoh surname, which it turns out is a very common last name, especially in places like Singapore and Malaysia. So it's a very Southeast Asian surname, which makes sense. Michelle Yeoh is from Malaysia. She is our most famous export. And if I scroll further down, I will learn that actually Yeoh could be 3 different Chinese surnames originally. It just so happens that these 3 surnames can be pronounced and spelled Yeoh, but they are different surnames. They represent different families. So what can I do to narrow it down? I could either look at the meaning, maybe you know the meaning of your Chinese surname, or I could look at the regions where this surname is found. Or the easiest is I could just ask a relative to confirm it for me. So either by showing them this page or by asking them to write it out and then comparing. Now, I read Chinese, so I can recognize it. And Michelle Yeoh's surname is this first one, the one meaning the poplar tree. And if I click on it, I can read a bit about the legendary origins of the Yeoh surname. And Yeoh is actually yang in Mandarin. So Yeoh is a more of a Hokkien, which is a Chinese dialect pronunciation. Um, so on this page, I can read about the legendary origins of the surname. I can see that there are a lot of Yeoh family tree books on the My China Roots database, and there is a variety of records available, which are all listed here. And at the bottom, there is a breakdown of where the Yeohs come from in China. So if you're not sure, this could be good to compare with what might be known within your family. And right at the bottom, if I keep scrolling, there are some tables with breakdowns of the pronunciations of the same surname in different dialects and by region in the world. And this is where you can see just how much a single surname can vary depending on the area, depending on the dialect, depending on the language spoken in the new country of arrival. Oh, Lynn just asked, is this online search tool free? It is indeed free if you access it from the Boston Public Library. It's completely free. You just need to be on site at any of the branches or use your library card to access it remotely. We can add some links also to tell you how to find it a bit later. So this is the surname database. And the other starting point, which is very important in Chinese ancestry research, is the finding your Chinese village. So let me just go back to my slides briefly. When, as you begin doing your Chinese ancestry research, you might hear about this concept of an ancestral village and how it is the key, the most important thing if you are interested in finding out about where your family is from. So when it comes to finding records of your family in China, which some people are interested in doing, there is an assumption that you can apply for birth records and death records in China and get official documentation for your ancestors. But those kinds of materials don't really exist. Things like birth certificates only became really compulsory very recently. So if you have an ancestor who was born in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, it is very unlikely that there will be any official documentation about their key life events, or even a passenger list of them, on at least on the Chinese side. I have yet to see a Chinese passenger list. So instead, the types of materials that are available are very local, private documents that are found inside the ancestral village that the person is from. So the ancestral village is not a city. It is not like the city of Shanghai or Canton or Macau. It is an actual village. Sometimes it is just a street. But these communities that often were rural for a long time and that are based in the villages have been in these areas for such a long time, for so many centuries, that they developed their own methods of keeping track of who's who and keeping track of local inhabitants. And amongst other things, they created memorials such as ancestral temples that are dedicated to the ancestors, that are dedicated to the clan. To give you an example, in my ancestral village in China, in Fujian province, there are several Yap temples dedicated to the Yaps. And inside these temples, there are ancestral tablets, there are inscriptions about our ancestors. There is also not far from there a graveyard dedicated to our earliest Yap ancestors who settled there uh, about 300 or 400 years ago. But the most valuable resource that can be found in the ancestral village is a zupu or a jiapu. These are family tree books. Um, and they often record all of the names of all the individuals within the clan, within the family. So there is a Yap Jiapu in my family that was kept in China, and it was being updated by a very old man in the village. So when I went to visit him, he was asking me about all the names of my Malaysian cousins and second cousins and uncles and aunts so that he could update the book. So these are books that are updated each generation, and they can go really far back in time. They can go hundreds of years back in time, even thousands. Um, they're essentially a giant family tree. In one entry, you will have the name of an individual, the name of their parents and children, sometimes some basic information about when they uh, when they passed away, where they are buried, if they occupied any kind of fancy position in government. It really depends. But we call this the Holy Grail in Chinese genealogy because it is just so valuable. And I will tell you more about how you can find these records. But the first step to finding this kind of book is knowing your village. And so this is where the My China Roots Village database comes in. Um, because a lot of people, they'll know a vague area. They'll say, "Oh yeah, my family's from Hainan," or "My family is from Toisan," but they don't really grasp where that is, or how big it is, or what is needed next to find the book. So we developed this tool so that you can easily identify where these locations are, even if you're using an old spelling or an old place name that doesn't really exist anymore. So I typed in Toisan into the search tool, and you'll see we've populated the database with all kinds of educational context about the area, what is it famous for, where did people migrate from this place. So Toisan is actually one of the key regions, the key districts in the Pearl River Delta, it's called, that a lot of Chinese Americans came from. Especially, starting from the gold rush period onwards, you had a lot of people from this area that left, that fled for various reasons. And so on this page, you can see where it is on the map. And it is not too far from Guangzhou, from Macau, and from Guangzhou, and from Hong Kong. So you can see sort of how people would have easily decided to make that journey. However, it is a big city. Toisan today is fairly big. And if you want to find your family tree book, your best bet is knowing the village that your family is from. So at the bottom of this page, we have one section that will link to the family tree books, the Jiapu, that are digitized and that are on My China Roots that you can look at. But there is also a section that lists all of the towns and the villages inside Taishan so that you can further narrow your search. For example, a lot of people can trace their roots in Duanfen, Duhu, Shuibu. These are all common towns that themselves are made up of many villages. So your job is not done here once you know the rough area. You will need to narrow it down a little bit more. So where can you find out about the village? The first step should be checking with your family. So asking about oral histories, asking if they remember the location, but also looking for tangible records and clues. Often the village is recorded on things like tombstones of ancestors, especially if you have a tombstone that has Chinese characters on it. It will often not just list the name of the individual, but also the village that they came from in China. So that would be my first suggestion. And then you want to look at other materials, such as immigration case files, which I'll be showing you in a second. So I've showed you the generic resources to get started. Now I will show you how to use the search tools. And I'll try to give you a few tips because there are a lot of records on the database. We have, millions of materials. I'll give you a few just helpful tips to navigate the database and try to use it smartly. So first, I'll just to give you an overview of the types of materials that we have. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of overseas records of Chinese people. So by that, I mean records from outside of China. In fact, if you look at all of these categories here, Chinese exclusion records, census, immigration, most of these are going to be overseas materials. So they're created abroad after the individual left China. Only the Zupus, this one here, is of Chinese materials that you can search. So the majority of matches that you will get will be of ancestors, say, in the USA, for example. At the top, we have a basic search form with a few fields, name, place that they might have lived in, and year. So to just show you what this looks like, I'm going to type in a name. I'm going to start with a basic one first, Hongfeng Li. I could type in an area, but I'll just show you what it looks like if I just search for a name to start off with. So, wow, that's a lot. I've got 5,000 results for Hongfeng Li. Now, of course, that we've reached our first challenge, which is that not all of these records are going to be relevant to my ancestor. It's impossible that there are so many records of one individual, which means that a lot of different people had this name, Hongfeng Li. And it is very common, to come across this issue where you are searching for records and it can be hard to figure out which one is actually relevant to you because there are so many individuals that share the same name. So amongst these 5,000 records, I can see in the left-hand side here, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. Yeah. On this left-hand side, I can see all of the categories of records that contain this name. So we have Chinese exclusion records, birth, marriage, and death records, and so on and so forth. I can also see the location that the source is from. So if you want to filter down your results, there are different ways to do it. You could look for a specific type of record, but you could also narrow it down by the location that you know your ancestor was based in. So if you know that they ended up in the USA, you can filter by United States. But I mean, some things to keep in mind, for example, is that if you had an ancestor who ended up in Canada, it's possible that they first landed in the US. And so there might still be US records of your ancestor, even though they ended up spending most of their life in Canada. And vice versa, actually, especially if your ancestors were in the North, so in like Seattle or in Boston. The other way to filter down your results, of course, is by date. So if you know the rough time period in which your ancestor was alive and would have moved around, then that's one way to filter. You can, of course, filter by gender. We have this extra Chinese surname filter. So if you click on any of these, it will only narrow down results where there is a Chinese name, where there is a Chinese surname visible. And this is where My China Roots is kind of unique. It is that we will index and transcribe and make searchable names both in English and in Chinese. So on this record, for example, you see there is an English name and a Chinese name. And in fact, if I scroll down, I can click on the surname, which will open the surname page connected to the database. It's just going back for now. I'll remove this filter. And then the last filter that you can use is if you want to see an image, because we have some collections that are image that don't have an image, so they are just an index. That's if you want to see an example. So for all of these, any of these results, you can click on the match and you'll be able to see all of the information that was transcribed from this record, including things like a birthplace or a birth date or an arrival date. So this is a census record for Hongfeng Li, which is usually a great starting point if you are just trying to figure out who are the people in your family, when were they born, who were they living with. The census is a great first step. For any of these results, you can also click to view the original photo. So if you click the red button that says view an original record, it will open the page and the document, and you can zoom in, you can take a closer look, especially in some cases, there might be some information that was not transcribed. Now, going back to my results, I have shown you just roughly what happens when you search. Now, of course, 5,000 results is way too much to filter down. So we have this advanced button that you can click right here next to the filters, which allows you to input multiple other fields that will then narrow your results. Now, with these filters, you want to be careful. You don't want to add too many that then it becomes so specific that the system won't be able to find any results. If you add an exact birth date, death date, residence place, migration event, all in one go, the system is not going to be able to find records, one record that matches all of these filters. So what I recommend is if you're playing around with it, try different things, apply a few filters, remove some filters to see what you get. The best thing that I use the most really is this location filter, which is quite a broad, flexible one, and it will search for any place that would have been associated with the person. It could be a birthplace, it could be a residence place, it could be a port of arrival. So for example, if I'm looking for records of Hongfeng Li, and I know that he ended up at some point in Boston, but I'm not sure if he was always there, I might input Massachusetts. And then I'll search for that. And it has reduced my results from 5,000 to 290, which is already pretty good. And you'll see that some of these end up looking like this. We have a first result, which is an immigration case file. So during the Chinese exclusion period, which lasted some 60 or so years, if a Chinese individual that was residing in the US wanted to leave, even if they were native born and, legally residing there, if they wanted to leave and come back, they needed to supply all kinds of documentation to prove that they were allowed back into the country. So every time they moved around or tried to enter, they needed to update their case file. They needed to communicate with the immigration officials to make sure that everything was in order, and they had to provide all kinds of documentation. Now, these case files are incredibly detailed and are found at the National Archives. So here we have an index to these files that are found in the New York National Archives. And here we have a case file for Hongfeng Li, also known as Hong Non Li, who was born in San Francisco, but lived in various places, including Boston and New York. Now, what's interesting here is you'll see the two variant names. This is quite typical for the same person to have different names spelled slightly differently. And this is something you want to keep in mind also as you are doing the search, which is you might come across a record that, the name doesn't look exactly the same, but the other information is very similar to what you know to be true about your ancestor. So don't just dismiss it because the name is spelled differently. It could still be relevant. Now, that's my first really tip when it comes to names. Now, the cool thing here is that we have an ancestral village, Onfun village in Sunning, that is listed here. I can see his occupation. He was a laundryman, and he's listed as arriving in 1924 in Boston. So there's a lot of information in this case file, and there could be even more if I apply for the original, which is possible if you just click go to, go to partner site, and then here you'll have the details for the original document, which you can just apply to get copies of. So this is good to know, especially if you have an ancestor who arrived during this time frame, so between the 1880s and the 1940s. It's highly likely that there would have been a case file for them, especially if they moved around, or at least documenting their first entry into the country. Okay, so going back to my results, so under Chinese exclusion records, we have these types of case files that I was just talking about. We also have some exclusion books. So again, these during the exclusion period, the goal was to limit and monitor arrivals of Chinese by checking what was their status. This first match is of a Fong Li. So again, the name is not exactly the same. It's not Hong Fong, it's just Fong. Could still be relevant. So this Fong Li arrived in Seattle, Washington, but was bound for Boston, arriving in 1913. If I click on this record, I can read up more on the information that is listed on this individual. I can also look at the image, which shows all of the names of these arrivals, including their status. So when you see MS of Mer, it means son of merchant. Male son of merchant, potentially. You also had students and sometimes diplomats and wives of merchants. These were all the people who were allowed into the country. This was the main way that people were able to come in. It was by claiming really close relationships to people who were already established in the US. Okay, going back to my results. I just want to take you back to the filters. I'm going to clear these, go back to my 5,000 results. And the other cool thing I want to show you is that under birthplace, now the assumption is that a lot of these individuals that are on the database are going to be born in China. So it's probably a bit pointless to type in China in the birthplace. But if you know a more specific region, for example, Toisan, you can also type it in. Our system is able to recognize, these alternative spellings that were used in the olden days of these place names. And this will look for any records of Hong Fong Li where his birthplace is mentioned, is listed as Toisan. So if I click search, I've got 8 results, which is kind of crazy that it's narrowed it down by so much. And I have a tombstone. You'll remember I mentioned earlier that tombstones are really valuable because they have detailed information like villages as well as names. And this is all information that has been transcribed by our team. You'll see the full name and the birthplace, which is in Toisan. This town of Shuibu is in Toisan. Tombstones are particularly valuable in a Chinese context, which is why we try to partner with local Chinese cemeteries in the US and other parts to preserve the information on the gravestones. Another filter which I mentioned is, of course, the source location. I mentioned filtering by Canada, for example. Another tool that I like to use if I'm looking for someone very specific, but I'm getting too many results. I mean, the example I use usually is of a guy called Sam Wong. And of course, Sam Wong is such a common name. I think there are even more than 5,000 hits for Sam Wong. And so in order to narrow my results, I will sometimes add a spouse or a parent to my search. So essentially what this does is it looks for records that mention both the individual together with a relative. Because if both of those things match, then it's highly likely that the record is a strong match for the person that I'm looking for. Um, so let's say I'm looking for a guy called Hong Fong Lee, whose father is called Bong Lee, and I add this to my search. And it has found a few census records, which makes sense because censuses list all of the names of relatives within a household or all of the people who are living in the same household. This first match is a census record from the 1930 census. This individual was living in Philadelphia, and indeed, it lists all of his relatives who were living under one roof, including his father called Bong Lee. So I really recommend if your ancestors were living in the US at any of these dates, so between the 1900s to I think we have up to the 1940 census, then they should be somewhere here. And you want to find this record, especially because of the amount of detail that it goes into. You have not only age and birth dates and birthplaces, but also sometimes dates of arrival into the country. In this case, this guy arrived in 1929. And some censuses, they'll have information on whether the individuals know how to read English, or if they speak other languages, or if they have a television at home. It's really quite interesting, just from a social perspective. Okay, now going back to the search. So far, I've been searching for a name, and I've been searching in English. Now, you may remember from the first page that I was on, by default, this is always set to searching in English. But what if you have a name in Chinese? You can definitely search for names in Chinese as well, because we have material that is bilingual. So let's say I am looking for a guy called Jan Li. So I can type in Chinese, um, just using I have an extra Chinese keyboard installed. So if I type in this name, I can then select the correct surname. So again, this uses the Chinese surname database where you can just type in letters the surname that you're looking for, and then you want to select the correct Chinese translation. So if I click search, you'll see that I have different types of records that come up. This time I have more directory entries. So these are business directories, telephone directories, student directories of Chinese people but living in the USA. Here's a guy called Albert. I mean, his English name is Albert, but he has a very Chinese name, who was based in San Francisco. These directories are great because they have this bilingual format. And the other thing that it will be able to trace is tombstones. And we have the same, I think it's the same guy, a guy also called Albert Wong with the same Chinese name, who's buried in South San Francisco. And the advantage of having the Chinese name is that it unlocks records in China. So on any record that you find on the database that has a Chinese name on it, if you scroll to the bottom of the record page, you will see it lists suggested similar records. So based on the information that is on this page, it will say, oh, it looks like these may be of the same guy. But if you scroll even further down, there is a section that says find family records of Albert Wong and his Chinese name. And underneath a red link that says view 6 potential records of Albert Wong, which I'm going to select. And this will open a new page with matches of the Chinese name within the Chinese materials. So you don't even need to type in Chinese at this stage. You can just, once you've found the right record, you can scroll down to the bottom of that page, click on the link, and it will search for those matches for you. So I've got six books that have turned up, six books. So each of these books is of the Wong family, but it is of different branches of the Wong family in different areas. Um, so let's just select one of these as an example so you can see what they look like. Um, these books are, when you look at them, even without reading Chinese, you know that it's a tree. If you zoom in, you can see that there are branches. Even without being able to read the Chinese, you can see that this would be the father of Albert Wong, if this is indeed his name, that this would be his son, etc., etc. Now we have this pop-up dictionary that appears when you click on any Chinese character. Oops, sorry. When you click on any Chinese character or when you hover over them, it will translate the single characters. It's a little bit pointless on the names because names are just names, so they're going to sound quite poetic if you translate them very literally. But it is very helpful if you're looking at more dense sections of text. At the top of the page here, you see these numbers. These actually correspond to the generation rank. So assuming that this yellow highlighted name, which is my Albert Wong that I was looking at before, assuming this is him, so I would have to compare the names of his son and his father and see if it sounds like the names that are in my tree. If it's correct, then he would be of generation 23 in this book, which means that I have 22 more generations that I can identify in the book, which is huge. It's massive. If you have 3 or 4 generations per century, that's many hundreds of years of ancestry that you can trace just within this single book. I want to show you another cool feature that we have available, which you can use at any point when you see this button that says extract text. So let's say you have this text right here, right, which you don't understand because you don't read Chinese. You could use this automatic dictionary, but you could also extract the text. So how it works, you extract, you hover over it with your mouse, then you click again, extract selected area, and then it will process the image and extract the Chinese characters. So with these extracted, you can then press show translation. This is just a Google translation, so to be taken with a pinch of salt, but it gives you a pretty good idea with very minimal effort what is contained. So it looks like this is, a description of this particular branch on this page of the Toisan Wong clan. So this is super powerful, and I recommend playing around with it to familiarize yourselves with these books. But this is really why I mentioned zupus are so valuable. We call them the Holy Grail. So, okay, I've shown you the Zupu search. What happens if, let's say, you know that there is a family tree book out there, and you have a Chinese name, someone scribbled it down for you, but you can't type. You don't have access to a Chinese keyboard, and you're not able to type in the name in here. What can you do? We recently added this image to text feature, which is the same as what I just showed you, where you hover over an image and it extracts the Chinese characters. But here you can upload your own image. So under resources, there is an option called image to text. If you click on that, you can select an image to upload. So I'm gonna choose this image. Let's say your auntie scribbled down the name of a person, right, on a piece of paper, and you want to get it extracted. So you can hover over the characters to extract it, and then it will be processed in OCR. And then you can just copy paste the name and put it back into my China roots. So here, Wang is the last name. It's always placed first in a Chinese name. So I'm just going to copy the last two characters and then copy paste them back into my search, which was here. And again, I can select my last name and search. So this makes it easier for those who don't have access to keyboards and things like that to do these searches. Okay, that kind of concludes my demo. Just to wrap up before I take any questions, let me go back. So what are some other resources that you can use if you are interested in getting the family tree tool and building it out and essentially getting the system to do the research for you, which is a possibility? We offer a detective subscription where essentially you fill in your family tree on mychinaroots.com. You get automatic record matches and you don't have to do any of the research yourself. So again, this is not available at the Boston Public Library. This is just if you want someone else to do the work for you, then this is another option. If you feel like you're not finding what you're looking for or you need extra hands-on help in China, then this is also something that we can help with. I've added the link to my China Root services because we always get asked about this in these talks too. So if you just want to speak to someone, you can just book a call with us. It's completely free. Just chat about where you're at in your research, where you might be stuck, and how to take the next steps. We'll be happy to speak with you. We can help you translate your documents or even organize a trip back to China. We can provide a tour guide and assisted visit back to your village so that you can get help finding your family tree book and asking the right questions and just following in the footsteps of your family. Okay, that concludes it, just under 1 hour. I'd be very happy to hear any questions that you have. My email is right here at the bottom of this screen if you have anything that you want to ask me directly and don't want to ask in the chat.
All right, so we have one that came in a little while ago. Leo is asking, is there a Chinese equivalent to findagrave.com?
A Chinese equivalent. You mean for graves in China? If that is the case, not that I know of, and I think, in fact, it would be really difficult to just logistically for an equivalent to exist because a lot of the um, cemeteries and even more local, like community cemeteries in ancestral villages, because of feng shui practices, they would be high up in the hills and they're often incredibly overgrown with weeds and tall grasses. And frequently, our researchers, when they go to the countryside to look for records and to look for graves, they're told, "Oh, sorry, you can't look at the graves this time of year because it's too overgrown. You have to come during tomb sweeping when we cut everything down." So I think it would be very hard. And also, um, uh, I think there would be just more superstition and suspicion around people walking into cemeteries and taking pictures compared to find a grave where I think it's a lot of cemeteries in the West are just public and anyone can walk in and just go for a walk and without necessarily visiting anyone there. Yeah, so to my knowledge, there isn't one.
So I see someone asking, I just want to, for anyone who came in late, this is being recorded and I will be sending a link to everyone who is registered once the recording is ready. Okay, and so we have someone else asking, are there any tools that can scan photos and matches?
Scan photos and matches. So scanning photos, what would this be for exactly? Is
So
it for extracting Chinese names or um, for a family photo? So we don't have any facial recognition software yet. This is yeah, unfortunately not. So it's not like you can upload a family photo just with faces and then we'll be able to say, yes, we recognize these people. No, unfortunately, our technology is not that advanced. We still need to work from names. Um, but who knows, in the next few years, it looks like it will be easier to do this kind of thing. Even now, I've been quite amazed. I was using Google Photos. Does anyone use Google Photos to manage their photos? Anyway, I was using it to create albums, um, you know, current albums of my holidays and my family gatherings, but I was also using it to organize old family photos. And Google Photos has this feature that recognizes faces and can let you tag people on a photo. And it was able to recognize people as babies in black and white photos who were then later grown up in color photos. And some of my relatives, who are now 60 plus, it recognized them as children. So there are other tools that you can use that just not on my China roots, but and I'm pretty sure other photo apps also support this. They have facial recognition. But of course they can only compare the faces with other photos that you would have taken and uploaded. Yeah.
All right, so let's see. So Ada is asking, do you have a DNA match feature in your website?
Unfortunately not. We don't offer DNA testing. There are companies in China that do this, and there are a few overseas, mostly adoptee focused companies, like in the US, that try to match people with families in China. But it's very challenging to access those databases because China's laws and rules around the transporting of genetic samples across borders are very strict. So technically, you can only access Chinese DNA databases if you are already in China. So you can still test with these companies if you are visiting China and you purchase a test in person or when you're there. It's also something that we can do, my China roots, we can help you order one and deliver it to you when you're visiting. But unfortunately, they can't be sent to the US, for example. That's just not possible. Um, yeah. And I would say that these DNA companies, they're not quite as big or developed compared to the size of the population. It's still not as popular, let's say, as it is with Ancestry DNA or the other big Western companies that you have. Uploading raw DNA data, I think it may be possible through some of them. It's worth checking. The big companies are WeGenie and 23 Morphang, I think. But if you like, please do send us an email. My colleagues who are in China, they're much more knowledgeable about DNA than I am. So um, do contact us if you want to discuss this more. I see there's a question from Leo about Zupus. Maybe I can answer that one. So Leo asks, are Zupu widespread throughout China? My father's from a village in the northwest, Shanxi province, where very few Chinese immigrants to America are from. Do you access or incorporate genealogy resources from Taiwan? Zupus are widespread throughout China. However, in our experience, the practice of keeping Zulpu was able to continue throughout the 20th century more easily in the south because it was further away from Beijing. And after the Communist Revolution, there was a big crackdown on all kinds of cultural practices that were considered to be old-fashioned and that were dragging the country down. And unfortunately, Zupus and Jiapus was one of those things. People thought that it was a backward practice and that it was stopping China from being modern. And you have a lot of villagers and people who burned their books because they thought that they represented all that was wrong about China, that it was being held back and it needed to modernize. And so we've found in our many years of working with different families that in the north, it's more common that this happened, that the practice kind of died out because of political reasons. And in the south, they were further away from the center of government and the political center. So they kind of continued it and kept up the practice a little bit more. But you still do find zulpos in the north. So the first step would be, trying to look at your village, contacting someone in your village to see um, if they still have a copy. If this is difficult, it's still worth checking My China routes. We do have zulpus from other parts of China, from northern provinces as well. So it's worth just checking. You can filter on My China routes. You can just go to the zulpu search, filter by province, and filter by surname, and you'll see if we have any for your surname in that province. And then the other question on genealogy resources from Taiwan, we don't currently, but there are some, I think we might have a few Zhupu that are from Taiwan, but it's also not as much as from mainland China. If you have any specific requests or parts of Taiwan that you're researching, again, do contact us and it's possible that we can help you.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. So Charlene's asking, I have family born in Hong Kong and Shanghai. How would I research this?
Good question. So these big city centers were a bit different because your ancestral village is not necessarily a village, it is just a neighborhood in Shanghai or Hong Kong. I would say the steps are still more or less the same, though. You want to collect as many names in Chinese and English as possible, and the area in Hong Kong or in Shanghai that they were from. Even if there was no ancestral village, they may have lived in a certain hub or neighborhood, for example, in Hong Kong, where there might be an ancestral temple where a zulpu would have been kept. So that's where I would start. And if you still have family, for example, in Hong Kong, it would be worth asking them if they're able to share anything or if they know how long the family was there. Um, yeah, I would start with that. And as with other families from other parts as well, I would try and look for tombstones of your deceased ancestors, the ones who were born in Hong Kong or Shanghai, to see if there are any clues on there. And if it's in Chinese and you can't read Chinese, then you can use the image to text tool to get a transcription as well.
Okay, so
Mm.
somewhat related to what you were just talking about, Dan is asking, are there any AI tools that can help?
Mm, AI tools. So we're kind of playing around with AI at the moment to help people better identify and find records. So at the moment, I mean, there are so many possibilities with AI, right? Um, and what we're trying to work on is develop a system that mm, helps people search in smarter ways because it's easy to get stuck or to quickly come across a brick wall and you think, oh no, it seems that there are no records here. When in fact, if you tweak the way that you're searching or the way that you formulate the filters, there might still be a match there. So I think that's where AI can help. Um, and I mean, I imagine that there are also ways that ChatGPT and these other tools can help trawl through other databases or other records. One of the things that we are, I mean, we haven't started doing, but we're kind of exploring is how can AI help quickly go through a really big document and find, you know, relevant names or organize the names in a more structured format. Or can it help us read a Zupu and convert a Zupu into a family tree? Oh, that would be so helpful if it could do that all in one go and then you don't have to do it manually. But it's still early days.
Definitely. Okay, so looks like it's our last question, and then I think we need to wrap it up. Ada is asking, do you have Zupus from Guangdong in your database?
Yes, definitely we do. Um, I can just show you quickly how you would find that if you are interested in Zupus. You open mychinarootslibrary.com, which brings you here, and then you can click this big Zupu section here, Zupu's Family Tree Books. It will, by default, ask you for a name, to type in a name and a last name. But if you just want to know generally what kind of books are there, you can click the Books tab and then filter by place Guangdong. And if you like, you can even add a surname, Wong or Li or Chin. Click search and it will show you all of the Zupus that we have. So we have 1,644 different Zupus from Guangdong. Okay. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
so thank you so much for everyone who came. You had great questions, and thank you again, Clotilda. It's pretty late where you are, and I really do appreciate it. We look forward to having you again. And once again, I will be sending in a follow-up email tomorrow that will have a link to the chat transcript. So if you listened, so if you missed anything in the chat, you will be getting that. And if you have any further
Mhm.
questions for Clotilde, let me see. There we
Feel
go.
free to
So,
email me.
so there's her email address in the chat. And if you missed that, you can also send me an email and I can forward it to her if you prefer to do that. It's up to you. And once again, thank you, Clotilde. And I hope everyone in the Boston area is staying dry this afternoon. It's kind of rainy out here right now. All right. And all right.
Yes, stay dry, everyone. Thank
Yes.
you so much, Jessie, for hosting,
Thank
as
you.
always.
Of course. I hope we see you again soon.
Yes. Bye bye. Have a nice
Bye bye.
evening.
You too.